It's a red letter day in so many ways. In the last hour, we'll be talking to the legendary former Texan Congressman Ron Paul, a man who stood for the presidency of the United States and through his now widely respected Ron Paul Institute strikes out on foreign policy issues. We'll be talking to him most proximately about Donald Trump, because at midnight tonight, Standard Eastern Time, that's 5 a.m. here in London, the first round of reimposed economic sanctions, a continuation of war by other means and not an alternative to war, as many people seem to forget. Siege, quarantine, economic sanctions are acts of war in international law, unless they have the authorization of international law through the Security Council of the United Nations, which in this case, of course, they don't. In fact, everybody except Israel and Saudi Arabia are against Donald Trump's unilateral scrapping of the Iran nuclear deal and the return to the path to war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. What could possibly go wrong? Donald Trump, the bull in the china shop at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning, will set the clock ticking to what could end up another Middle Eastern war, because this is merely a precursor to a much more savage raft of sanctions which are due to come into place in November. November is always an auspicious date in US-Iranian relations, and it usually ends with Iran springing an October surprise. And it will be no surprise to me if Iran doesn't do so again, and the imminence of what would be, in effect, a full-scale regime change operation kicking in November. But we'll talk to Senator Congressman Ron Paul about many things. His son is Senator Rand Paul, still a live wire in American congressional politics. We'll be talking to Ron Paul also about Russia, Russiagate, and the ongoing pursuit of President Trump by the Democrats and the deep state and most of the U.S. media on the Russia front. Senator John McCain openly stated just a few days ago that Ron Paul was an agent of President Vladimir Putin. So, should I call him Comrade Ron Paul or Senator, Congressman? We'll see. We'll take some guidance on that. But in the first hour, we'll be talking about a matter much closer to home, on which we touched last night, but no sooner had I left the studio last night and I saw a scoop on the front page of the Daily Express. Not words in recent years it's been possible to utter. But under new ownership, perhaps the Express is ruffling a few feathers, is rustling up some journalistic fervour, because their scoop was then followed by more or less everybody else. And it was this: the Fair Oak Farm conspiracy. Sounds like an Agatha Christie story, and indeed it may well turn out to be. But here's the story as revealed by the Daily Express. A dirty dozen. We had the Gang of Four in the early 80s. Now we've got the dirty dozen of anti-Corbyn coup plotters inside the Parliamentary Labour Party have been routinely taking the 7:39 p.m. out of Waterloo Station down to Sussex and into a limousine and carted off to a £150 a night luxury farmhouse spread, where, according to one of the participants, who does acknowledge that he was there, someone called Chris Leslie, you'd be forgiven if you've never heard of him, though, as I recall, he has quite a conceit of himself for a man who has achieved virtually nothing in British politics. He admits he was there, but says they were discussing merely policy development, and added disingenuously, of course, "I don't recall the name Jeremy Corbyn even cropping up in the discussions." So a dirty dozen of Blairite anti-Corbyn coup plotters spent night after night, week after week, at the Fair Oak Farm, and Chris Leslie doesn't recall the name of Jeremy Corbyn even popping up. And if you believe that, I have a bridge here in London that I can sell you. One other alleged participant, though, and it's important to make this clear, vehemently now, not in the story, though he claims the quotes attributed to him in the story are also falsified. He has vehemently denied to us, and we must accept it, that Stephen Kinnock was not one of the plotters, at least at the Fair Oak Farm. He's never been there, he says, and he's taking action against the Daily Express for saying that he was. But we have established that the Express are right, that there have been regular meetings at the Fair Oak Farm, and we have at least one Blairite Labour Member of Parliament admitting that he was there, for policy development, of course. Personally, I regard it as an important step forward in the journalistic endeavours that I hope are now underway to unmask what is an attempt at another coup against Jeremy Corbyn, this time by actually breaking away from the Labour Party, forming their own independent group, and if they can get enough people on board, seeking recognition from the Speaker of the House of Commons to sit as a pro-EU, I suppose you'd have to call them pro-war group of Blairites. I don't know what they'd call themselves, the War Criminals Party. They have all supported the war crimes that Labour and Conservative governments have carried out over the last 15 years or so. Or, I don't know, the Survivalists, or some other name you can come up, perhaps, with some suggestions. And if you're in a journalistic endeavour, to try and get to the bottom of a story, it's always a good rubric to follow the money. So, I called on overnight the Labour leadership not to be a punch bag in this affair, but to go onto the front foot. We know that Chris Leslie was there, so have him in. Grill him on what he was doing there. Which policy development was he involved in? Who paid for the trips to Fair Oak Farm? Not the public, one hopes. And if not the public, then whom? Who has put up £50 million, £50 million, undreamt of treasure in the launch of a British political party, to launch a new centre party? Who put it up? I want to know. Is it foreign money? Is it money that's come from the near abroad, from the EU, from Europhile campaigning organisations, from foreign donors? I want to know that, don't you? Doesn't British democracy demand absolute transparency on who is funding the creation of a breakaway party from Labour, and who knows, maybe a breakaway party from the Brexiteer Conservatives too? And how will it fare? Will it do as well as the SDP? Well, if it does, it will keep Theresa May in power for a decade, which may, of course, be the point, certainly from the point of view of those donating the money. Which Labour MPs are likely to join it? How many Labour MPs are likely to join it? What will their attitude be to East-West relations, to events in the Middle East, to a potential war coming up with Iran? What will their attitude be on domestic and foreign politics? 0344 499 1000 is the number to have your say. We'll be talking to the great Steve Topple, independent journalist at the Canary, in my case for the second time today, because he and I are, of course, a double act in our Topple Galloway show. We'll be talking to Barbara Slavin, director of the Future of Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council. We'll be talking to Matthew Cochrane, spokesperson for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, following the earthquake in Indonesia. The 6.9 magnitude quake is known to have killed nearly 100 people and left 20,000 people homeless and sent thousands of tourists fleeing, including David Beckham and family, as I just saw in a picture in the newspaper. And then finishing off the show for a whole hour, maybe half of it devoted to him personally, Ron Paul, a figure of historical importance in American politics and in the politics of opposition to foreign adventures. It's all coming up over the next 2 3/4 hours or so with me, George Galloway, on the mother of all talk shows.